World War III Russian roulette? Are we in for a nuclear winter? As it stands, and as I have been warning of in my pronouncements over the last 2 years, since the beginning of this conflict, we stand at the precipice of total war, a war of all against all, as the occult eschatology has foretold, and as I mentioned in the video of the same name, of which you can catch that video by signing up as a member, either on Patreon or YouTube. The collective West have greenlit long-range missile strikes deep into Russian territory, utilising weapon systems that must be calibrated by Western intelligence and guidance information, and this seems to be a parting gift by the Biden administration for the nascent Trump administration. Indeed, we now can see why billionaires were busy building doomsday bunkers last year and the year prior, and that is because they got the memo and knew the plan in advance. However, us normal folk will have to suffer the ravages of modern war and, God forbid, thermonuclear exchange. Of course, there are those that enunciate that nuclear weapons are but a hoax that has been perpetuated by the government to control the masses by a plot device, a MacGuffin, a mechanism that inspires fear and hence locks the population into the incessant dread myth of mutually assured destruction, leveraging this fear to maintain the domestic and world order as we see it. To that conception of the situation, I hope it is in fact true, because the opposite is unthinkable. This was the destiny of America all along, since its inception within the Masonic halls of England and France, and within the northern Italian noble palazzos that were verdantly ensconced in Kabbalah. The searching for the diamond in the rough, the grand and utopian order from the issuance and steering of chaos, and the coordinated conspiracy that has led us to the precipice of the alchemical melting pot of conflagrative putrefaction. The first stage of the great work, or the magnum opus as they call it. Francis Bacon, whose posthumously published 1627 work titled The New Atlantis, outlines the secret reason for the transatlantic colonial project, the seeding of the idea of America, and its utility to the long-term agenda of the goal for world government. Naturally, what we see now is simply the next stage of this furtive endeavour to bring the world to its base state of nature and reconciliate the surplus of humanity that they, the cabal, see as unnecessary. In Francis Bacon's work, The New Atlantis, referring to America, of which was also named Ben Salem, or New Jerusalem, as the Knights Templar knew it as. There in that tome of Francis Bacon, he envisioned America as a utopia that could bring about world democracy, and thus the emancipation of mankind from suffering. Manly P. Hall stated in The Secret Destiny of America, published in the early 20th century, referring to Bacon and his membership in the Order of the Quest, as Hall called it, that, quote, "There exists in the world today, and has existed for thousands of years, a body of enlightened humans united in what might be termed an Order of the Quest. It is composed of those whose intellectual and spiritual perceptions have revealed to them that civilization has a secret destiny. The outcome of this secret destiny is a world order ruled by a king with supernatural powers. This king was descended of a divine race. That is, he belonged to the order of the illumined. For those who come to a state of wisdom then belong to a family of heroes, perfected humans. Ben Franklin spoke for the Order of the Quest, and most of the men who worked with him in the early days of the American Revolution were also members. The plan was working out. The New Atlantis was coming into being, in accordance with the program laid down by Francis Bacon 150 years earlier. The rise of American democracy was necessary to a world program. At the appointed hour, the freedom of man was publicly declared. Not only were many of the founders of the United States government Masons, but they received aid from a secret and august body existing in Europe which helped them to establish this country for a peculiar and particular purpose, known only to the initiated few. Hall continues on to say, quote, "In an old book of rules used by the brothers of the secret orders is the following, quote, 'Our brothers shall wear the dress and practice the customs of those nations to which they travel, so that they shall not be conspicuous or convey any appearance that is different or unusual. Under no condition shall they reveal their true identity or the work which they have come to accomplish, but shall accomplish all things secretly and without violating the laws or statutes of the countries in which they work.' Quote, 'It is our duty and our privilege to contribute what we can to this universal plan. It will go on served by the unknowns until the Platonic Empire is established on the earth, and the towers of the new Atlantis rise from the ruins of a materialistic and selfish world. World democracy was the secret dream of the great classical philosophers. Thousands of years before Columbus, they were aware of the existence of our Western Hemisphere and selected it to be the site of the philosophic empire. The brilliant plan of the ancients has survived to our time, and it will continue to function until the great work is thus accomplished," unquote. He also states that, Manly P. Hall that is, quote, "This shall end in a world empire, led by a monarch with supernatural abilities," unquote. This is what the Zohar of Kabbalah mentions, that after the mass kull, the tikkun, the rectification of the world through fire, there shall come after the tribulation, after the purgatory via the grave, he who shall reign with a rod of iron, a new eternal and worldwide kingdom. To Muslims and Christians alike, one would know this oft-spoken monarch as a false prophet and a herald of Satan, the Antichrist, the Al-Masih al-Dajjal. Again, as Yuval Noah Harari states, author of the book Homo Deus, the God-Man, or the God-Man, and acclaimed World Economic Forum speaker, quote, "They, the world elite, shall attain bliss, immortality, and divinity, even if it kills them," unquote. Hall goes on to state, quote, "World democracy was the secret dream of the great classical philosophers. Towards the accomplishment of this greatest of all human ends, the outlined programs of education, religion, and social conduct directed to the ultimate achievement of a practical and universal brotherhood, and in order to accomplish their purposes more effectively, these ancient scholars bound themselves with a certain mystic ties into a broad confraternity. In Egypt, Greece, India, and China, the state mysteries came into existence. Orders of initiated priest philosophers were formed as a sovereign body to instruct, advise, and direct the rulers of the states. This is what's known as the secret society of Moshe or Akhenaten. Thousands of years ago in Egypt, these mystical orders were aware of the existence of the Western Hemisphere and the great continent which we now call America. The bold resolution was made that this Western continent should become the site of the philosophic empire. Just when this was done, it is impossible now to say, but certainly the decision was reached prior to the time of Plato, for a thinly veiled statement of this resolution is the substance of his treatise on the Atlantic Islands. One of the most ancient of man's constructive ideals is the dream of a universal democracy and a cooperation of all nations in a commonwealth of states. The mechanism for the accomplishment of this ideal was set into motion in the ancient temples of Greece, Egypt, and India. So brilliant was the plan and so well was it administrated that it has survived to our time, and it will continue to function until the great work is accomplished. Not only must we preserve that which we have gained through ages of striving, we must also perfect the plan of the ages, setting up here the machinery for a world brotherhood of nations and races. This is our duty and our glorious opportunity," unquote. The following excerpt from a letter written by Cecil John Rhodes to his close friend W.T. Stead in the autumn of 1890, quote, "The key of my idea discussed with you is a society, copied from the Jesuits, as to organisation, an idea which ultimately leads to the cessation of all wars. The only thing feasible to carry this idea out as a secret one, secret society, gradually absorbing the wealth of the world, to be devoted to such an object. Fancy the charm to young America, to share in a scheme to take the government of the whole world, unquote. Now let's notice a statement made by H.G. Wells, a 33rd degree Mason, from his 1934 book, Experiment in Autobiography. Quote, "I believe this idea of a planned world state is one to which all our thought and knowledge is tending. It is appearing partially and experimentally at 1,000 points. Its coming is likely to happen very quickly. Plans for political synthesis seem to grow bolder and more extensive. The new plan in America, meaning FDR's New Deal, and the new plan in Russia, meaning Stalinism, are both related to the ultimate world state," unquote. Let us not forget that H.G. Wells also wrote of the implementation of the Perpetual War doctrine, or the usage by the superblocks that shall arise in the 21st century of a limited nuclear war for the purposes of narrative theatrics, which will thence pave the way for the implementation of the general strategy of perpetual war that we saw in Orwell's 1984. H.G. Wells also wrote this in Shape of Things to Come in the 1930s or so, quote, "A long economic slump causes a major war that leaves Europe devastated and threatened by plague." Of course, that's what a nuclear war would cause, the piles of dead bodies, the irradiated water supply, the irradiated food by consequence, would lead to a great and most terrible pestilence befalling upon the land, befalling upon the continent, rather. In decades of chaos, with much of the world reverting to medieval conditions, pilots and technicians, this is the technocracy, formerly serving in various nations' air forces, maintain a network of functioning airfields. Around this nucleus, technological civilization is rebuilt, with the pilots and other skilled technicians eventually seizing worldwide power and sweeping away the remnants of the old nation-states. This is the same idea that you see within Fallout, with the Enclave and the plot, the narrative surrounding that.
Bud here has an idea for 3 interconnected vaults. But we need more ideas. We need your ideas. Because it was the spirit of competition that made our companies great. And I propose we bring that same spirit of competition to our solution. We have over 100 vaults spread across America. Enough for each of you to claim several, where you can play out your own ideas for how to create the perfect conditions for humanity, whatever you want to do. No one needs to know. And may the best idea win.
We could intentionally overcrowd a vault so people have to compete to survive inside it.
We have been developing a robot that delivers milk to the front door. It's quite intelligent. I would like to see a vault governed by it.
What about using a vault to develop a super mutant soldier, using illegal immigrants?
We could pump psychotropic drugs into the air supply.
We could separate parents and children, and only the smartest kids reach adulthood.
It's a fun idea. There's a lot of earning potential with the end of the world. But we're talking about making a significant investment based on a hypothetical. How can you guarantee results?
By dropping the bomb ourselves. Mr. Howard? Everything all right, Mr. Howard?
Fine. I'm fine, Betty.
He is so excited to meet you. A nuclear event would be a tragedy, but also an opportunity. Perhaps the greatest opportunity in history, because when we are the only ones left, there will be no one to fight. A true monopoly.
Mr. Howard, huge fan. I'm Henry, but everyone calls me Hank. Yeah. Wow.
Your father has been around for a very long time. Part of an organization that thought they had the answers to all the world's problems.
And that scene where you shoot Joey Toro in the face? Feo fuerte y formal.
This is our chance to make war obsolete. Because in our current societal configuration, which took shape without intentional guidance, we have friction, we have conflict, and we have war. And war, well, war never changes.
Again, the technical, the scientifically minded, the financial and the financial elite, the captains of commerce and industry, of government as well, planned the Great War in 2077. The Great War being the atomic war, which all but destroyed the majority of humanity and, of course, sent humanity back to the Stone Age. Of course, they went into their bunkers at that point. They survived in their bunkers for 200 years in a state of advanced technological development, again, comparative to the rest of the world that had been endarkened, that had been sent back to the Dark Ages vis-a-vis this mass war, this mass conflagration, this thermonuclear exchange between China and America within the parallel universe of Fallout. It's the same idea. A benevolent dictatorship is set up, paving the way for world peace by abolishing national divisions, enforcing the English language, promoting scientific learning, and outlawing religion. The enlightened world's citizens are able to depose the dictators peacefully and go on to breed a new race of super talents, able to maintain a permanent utopia, unquote. H.G. Wells made a prediction of a 25-year global conflict here, from 1940 to 1960, though the period of time is not to be taken literally. Essentially, it is a conflict that would be perpetual by the standards of the day. And moreover as well, these individuals, with what they're doing regarding this next world war that is on the horizon, that is so tangible, one can taste it. I believe that they are mad enough to do this. They are mad enough to go about bringing an end to civilization as we know it. They will retreat into their bunkers. They will retreat underground and wait out the murder dome that society and the world shall devolve into, that the surplus human capital that they no longer find necessary, that they find actually as a liability to their rule going forward, will thus snuff themselves out through attempting to survive within this very brutal environment, this pestilential environment, this toxic environment. They shall emerge perhaps a century or perhaps several decades later, and they shall rise above all of this death and misery, above this base level of the state of nature, and shall take total control of the world and wipe away the remnants of the old world. Again, this would be a long-term process, perhaps several decades, perhaps a century. It is said of in 1984, quote, "In 1984 there is a perpetual war between Oceania, Eurasia and East Asia, the superstates that emerged from the global atomic war. The war is not meant to be won, it is meant to be continuous. Hierarchical society is only possible on the basis of poverty and ignorance. This new version is the past, and no different past can ever have existed. In principle, the war effort is always planned to keep society on the brink of starvation. The war is waged by the ruling group against its own subjects, and its object is not the victory over either Eurasia or East Asia, but to keep the very structure of society intact. Bertrand Russell, projecting into the future, wrote, quote, "The New World Order system, one may surmise, will be something like this, except for the governing aristocracy. All but 5% of males and 30% of females will be sterilized. As a rule, artificial insemination and artificial wombs will be preferred over the natural method. The unsterilized, if they desire the pleasures of love, will usually have to seek them with sterilized partners. Children will be taken from their mothers and reared by professional nurses. The labouring class, meaning all those but the aristocracy, will have such long hours of work and so little to eat that their desires will hardly extend beyond sleep and food. There will be abolition of the family and a supreme duty of devotion to the state. Gradually, by selective breeding, the congenital differences between the rulers and the ruled will increase until they become almost different species. Yuval Noah Harari reiterates that within his two works, Homo Deus and 21 Lessons for the 21st Century. A revolt of the plebs, the ruled masses, would become as unthinkable as an organised insurrection of sheep against the practice of eating mutton. Even if all are miserable, all will believe themselves happy because the government will tell them that they are so, unquote. The Impact of Science on Society, 1953. Alice Bailey, wife of Foster Bailey, a famous 33rd degree Mason, in her book, Externalization of the Hierarchy, wrote about, quote, points of light, unquote, in connection with a, quote, new group of world servers, unquote, engaged in the effort of group work of a new order, the world of the brotherhood, the forces of light, unquote, and that out of the spoliation of all existing culture and civilization, the new world order must be built. She then went on to forecast that, quote, great changes will take place. National currencies will be largely superseded by a universal monetary exchange. National material assets and the needed commodities will all be provided for under an entirely new system, world socialism. Private enterprise will be regulated. The great public utilities, the major material resources, and the sources of planetary wealth, iron, steel, oil, and wheat, for instance, will be owned by a governing, controlling international group, under international direction. This moment is symptomatic of a change of the orientation of man's thinking, foundational to the New World Order which will emerge. In the preparatory period for the New World Order, there will be a steady and regulated disarmament. It will not be optional. No nation will be permitted to produce and organise any equipment for destructive purposes. Of course, a worldwide war that is so absolutely destructive that it leaves people, it leaves the world population that remain as a remnant, a residue. It will leave them in a state of total anxiety, neuroses. They will essentially be putty in the hands of this internationalist despotic class, who will, of course, be able to use that absolutely destructive war, that this residue of the human population, this remnant, will be all too willing to give up all of their sovereignty, all of their power, so that this saviour class can come in, this enclave, if you will, and take control, to disarm them, to merge all nations into a world government structure. One of the first tasks of any future peace conference will be to regulate this matter and gradually see to the disarming of the nations. Again, listen to that. One of the first tasks of any future peace conference. When do you get peace conferences? After wars. And where would a peace conference talk about the gradual disarming of the nations? which, by the way, is one of the major tenets, cornerstones of the UN. That's right, a world war. A peace conference after a global, let's say a global atomic exchange. Again, it doesn't really have to be real. It only has to be perceived as real, right? Externalization of the hierarchy, New York, Lucis Publishing Company, a division of Lucis Trust, a United Nations NGO. That was in the year 1957, written by Alice Bailey. Lucis Trust, by the way, Lucifer, Prometheus, the rebel, he who implores man to transcend or attempt to transcend above God. Barbara Marx Hubbard, a former advisor to Presidents Bush Sr. and Reagan, and a US vice presidential candidate in 1984, wrote in her unpublished manuscript, The Book of Co-Creation, an evolutionary interpretation of the New Testament, which she claimed was channeled to her by her, quote-quote, spirit guide. She states, quote, "No worldly peace can prevail until the self-centered members of the planetary body, those who oppose, resist the coming New World Order, either change or die. That is the choice. This act is as horrible as killing a cancer cell. It must be done for the sake of the future of the whole. So be it. Be prepared for the selection process which is now beginning. We, the elders, supposed spirits, have been patiently waiting until the very last moment before the quantum transformation to take action to cut out this corrupted and corrupting element in the body of humanity." Jonas Salk, by the way, also mentioned this in his very infamous book, Survival of the Wisest. It is like watching a cancer grow. Something must be done before the whole body is destroyed. Now as we approach the quantum shift from creature human to co-creative human, the human who is an inheritor of godlike powers, the destructive 1/4, must be eliminated from the social body. We have no choice, dearly beloveds. It is a case of the destruction of the whole planet, or the elimination of the ego-driven, godless 1/4 who, at this time of planetary birth, can, if allowed to live on to reproduce their defective disconnection, destroy forever the opportunity of Homo sapiens to become Homo universalis, Homo Deus, heirs of God, unquote. Again, there's the Luciferian, Promethean mindset. Man becoming God, right, or becoming like God, in a very materialistic sense, by the way. We're not even talking about attempting to gain a connection with God or a relationship with God as a type of theosis, but an actual materialistic and technological deception, delusion of becoming God or becoming like God. So that was as quoted by Johanna Michelson in Like Lambs to the Slaughter, page 308. Quote, "Over the next 20 to 30 years, 2025 is exactly 30 years since this was stated, so he's quite precise with his little prediction here. We are going to end up with world government. It's inevitable. We have to empower the United Nations and we have to govern and regulate human interaction. There's going to be a worldwide conflict." Let me reiterate that. There's going to be a worldwide conflict. This was in 1995. Coercion and consensus will follow. That's all part of what will be required as we give birth to the first truly global civilization. That's all part of what will be required as we give birth to the first truly global civilization, unquote. James Garrison, president of the Gorbachev Foundation USA. To quote, "One world under Gorbachev, San Francisco Weekly." That was in the year 1995. With this alteration of the prescribed nuclear doctrine of the Russian state, we see that the right to use nuclear strikes, be them strategic or tactical, along with any retaliatory action in the interests of escalation dominance, can now be extended to nuclear-armed near-peer competitors who are aiding and abetting a proxy regime in its attack on the territory of the Russian state. In other words, with the continued Storm Shadow or Scalp missile attacks, including ATACMS systems with another 2 barrages of Storm Shadows just striking Russian territory, as reported at 9 AM GMT on the 22nd of November. I want to mention as well, when this began, this entire Storm Shadow thing, this attack, this missile attack, this AOKing of the attack on Russia, it was the final day of Scorpio, which is, according to astrotheology, the sign of death. It is actually under the sign of Scorpio was when the storming of the Winter Palace was conducted. There's been a lot of major conflict-inspiring events that have occurred during Scorpio. It is very much linked to the World Tarot card. It's the westernmost point. It is similar to one's descent into the underworld, one's descent into the unconscious, into the dark winter, the dark night of the soul. Remember, Biden mentioned that we would be going through a dark winter. This is all alchemical. It's relating to the first stage of the alchemical great work, which is what, of course, Manly P. Hall was stating. It's what all of these various, essentially, Kabbalists were stating. And that is conflagrative putrefaction, to decay or cause mass spoliation, like Alice Bailey stated, to the old order, to destroy it fully. That preceding the age of fire must come an age of darkness, only for thence the phoenix to arise from that underworld, like the sun arising at the dawn from the decay, the chthonic, subterranean, unconscious state of the night, of the lunar night, of the underworld, in that sense. This is all tied into what we see within these death and resurrection deities, be them Orpheus, or be them Tammuz, or Dumuzi, or what have you. It's all surrounding that idea. So all of this is based around a sort of cyclicality that is in line with astrotheology, which of course underpins, essentially, in a very broad respect, that of esotericism as a whole, that of the Kabbalistic corpus, which has infected the entire world. It has infected the halls of power, the aisles of government. So the collective West is now in a de facto state of war with the Russian state. It is a military doctrine, a protocol of military procedure that has been put in place by the Russian state. Putin does not make the call. If this trajectory of travel remains unchanged, the West will assuredly be swept away in a massive conflagration before the end of Christmas. If they persist, and they will, we know they will, they have to, as part of the plan, of course, 72 minutes. That is the theorized duration of time of a thermonuclear war until all of human civilization is snuffed out. Therefore, with this fact, why do the collective West leaders seem unconcerned by the immediate prospect of qualitatively entering a war to end all wars, by the way, and risking a direct confrontation with a near-peer competitor like Russia? Is this simply a Thucydides trap, a crumbling empire in Washington seeking relevancy in a rapidly changing world, geopolitically flailing about? Or does this run deeper than that? And as I've already outlined previously, it does run deeper than that. That's why when journalists ask Keir Starmer, the UK Prime Minister, the very spineless and limp-dick UK Prime Minister, are you not concerned at all? Or are you rather comfortable with the fact that, we could be entering a nuclear war with Russia? Are you comfortable with putting the nation in that sort of harm's way? And like a robot, like an automaton, a political automaton, he merely responds with the MPC, the pre-programmed line of, it's been 1,000 days of conflict in Ukraine. We've got to double down our support for Ukraine. Putin cannot win this war, so on and so forth. It's a script, and it's not even a very good script. Hell, I've seen better acting in wrestling, in the WWE. Absurd individuals with a puerile and simplistic understanding of national and military procedure as it pertains to Russia seem hell-bent on playing thermonuclear Russian roulette. Why? Why not simply abide by previous agreements and accords and expand NATO no further eastward, inclusive of the establishment of proxy regimes, of course? That is the sensible option to avoid further escalation and bring dispute resolution to this contentious issue and safeguard humanity's future. Humanity in a very collective sense, but of course this minority of the quote-quote Order of the Illumined, the Order of the Quest, the secret society of Moshe or Akhenaten, have other plans at hand for the world. I want to mention as well, and I can't mention this on YouTube, unfortunately, but I have in my possession certain quotes, a manuscript from 1952 that provides a secretive meeting where, I'll just say, the leaders of this Kabbalistic cabal outlined the plan for World War III and the ways in which they were attempting to foment it at that time. But unfortunately, they had no such luck, because though the Russians were fully ready for war, they had that fighting spirit, that tenacity to fight, that mendacity to fight. The Americans were nonetheless war-weary, and they were war-weary from, of course, the Second World War. And it's only been after this duration of time that the Americans now can be, as you see within comments, that they can be, brought into that frenzy, that war frenzy, brought into the state of mass formation psychosis, brought into the state of calling anyone who will not abide by this insanity, who will not support this insanity wholeheartedly, as traitors to the country. That's what I'm seeing within the comments section, and people stating that we will wipe Russia out, so on and so forth. No. Even on the face of it, just on paper, we will all die. All of us will die if we get into even a conventional war with Russia. Never mind a thermonuclear exchange. Even an exchange of conventional warheads would still, by all intent and purposes, completely send us back to the Dark Ages. Send us back to a state of nature. You'd have a patchwork of competing tribes where once existed these grand civilizations of both the West and the East. I mean, you're talking about total atavism, a regression back to primitive survivalism, an actualization of our entire bestial state that existed pre-civilization, pre-society. I mean, I don't really believe that people are fully cognizant of what is fully at stake here. And of course, of the grander agendas at play. The masses in general, of course, I'm not speaking to the audience. The audience are well aware, but just the masses in general. However, that is not the agenda here. Peace is not the agenda. Sensible policy is not the agenda. The narrative must be brought forth through escalatory exposition. Indeed, I suspect this is akin to what I stated in my I Don't Want to Set the World on Fire video, where I outlined that what we may be seeing here is a twisted reflection of the Fallout Enclave plot, where a secretive fifth column of the government, a cabal, secretly began the Great War of 2077 in the parallel Fallout universe, to thus have a great reset and begin again, to create a utopia once the fallout had cleared and the still remaining human population could be vanquished as those tinged with irradiation, those unclean, those anti-evolutionary elements. And with only the Enclave and their new synthetic human race, born of genetic hacking and artificial wombs, surviving. This naturally aligns with the depopulation policy that has been spoken of by the One World utopians since at least the late 19th century, but it goes further back within the esoteric corpus and the various secret societies that populate the halls of government that are comprised of the captains of commerce and industry and lord over the bastions of academia. The continuity of the agenda will persist unabated, no matter what president or party wins. It is a uniparty after all, as we have seen during the first Trump administration, and is the case from the strategic policy documents outlining America First. Ukraine was provided with the munitions and armaments which forced the hand of Russia to prepare for the special military operation, which would then later conveniently occur during Biden's presidency, ensuring that Trump could be reinstituted to string out the venting of the American people's hatred and anger aroused by this imperialistic policy leading to a new international order. Moreover, it also permitted, by Trump losing in 2020 and stringing this out, it allowed them to build up that narrative of World War III, and of course with Trump involved now, with Trump now back within the White House at the helm, he is the populist president. So therefore he can bring into that conflagration of World War III, into that meat grinder, that murder machine, the demographics that they desire to get rid of, the demographics that are a threat to the implementation of the New World Order. That is essentially conservative males, right? Conservative males between the ages of 25 and around about 40, 45, to get rid of those individuals through the meat grinder of war. Of course, as well, it also allows support, initial public support, which provides momentum to the narrative, that the metascript of World War III, it allows it to remain buoyant within the minds of the populace, whereas, of course, if Biden was, or Kamala rather, had won the presidency, then of course people would be less inclined to follow Kamala into the jaws of nuclear oblivion, right? As they would, of course, with Trump. And Trump can bring forth these peace deals, talk with Russia, and of course when Russia inevitably declines the offer, and all of this escalates eventually into World War III by perhaps the Europeans, primarily the French and British, still continuing to give the green light to Ukraine to fire Storm Shadow and Scalp missiles deep into the territorial expanse of Russia, then of course Russia will see that as an act of aggression, an act of war, and they will respond in kind to either France or Britain. That will be in whatever way it appears. Either they will attack them, the Baltic nations or Poland or what have you, or they will actually strike Britain or France proper. That will then trigger NATO's Article 5. That would bring about World War III. Another thing to mention as well is that very soon they will bring, once Kiev gets flattened, I think that's, that is nigh, that is on the horizon, especially with the Storm Shadow missiles. They're just constantly rolling in to Russian territory, just hitting Russian territory. As we speak, they're firing Storm Shadow, Scalp, and missiles, ATACMS into Russia. Eventually, Russia will respond in a very big way. They just won't be field testing new missile systems like the Oreshnik, they will, in all actuality, just flatten, probably using a thermobaric bomb, that of Kiev, and those in Hurevsky Street will be, of course, completely taken out, taken offline. The proxy regime at that point will cease to exist. And by the way, this will only escalate. We are on the escalation escalator. This isn't being diffused anytime soon. That's not the agenda here. This is going to escalate into straight up, I think, all-out war. Because that's what's desired. If you read the Zohar, the Kabbalah, that's why 2 years ago, even though I was called a fearmongerer, I was called hyperbolic and all of this, I stated that there would be a perpetual war brought about during this conflict. There would be mass devastation of Western and Eastern cities to bring the population into a neo-feudal world government. Because how did I know that? I have an extensive library of over, at this point, about 450 books. The majority of them are old books on the esoteric, on the Kabbalah. I've also read the Zohar, not cover to cover, of course, but I've gone through most of it, most of the 4,500 pages of it. I'm fully aware of course, the metaphor and the real-world implications of the metaphors that are detailed within the Zohar. And of course, the Zohar outrightly, in certain parts, just simply directly states what's going to happen. They're going to usher in plague. They're going to usher in mass devastation, a mass cull, an ending of what we would know as Western civilization, of European civilization. But it's stated, and this was stated by the Belarusian TV channel ONT, this is their, I believe, news channel, their main channel. Armed groups from Poland, Lithuania and Ukraine are planning to attack 4 regions in southwestern Belarus. Then, of course, NATO will attack. That was, at the time of recording this, 2 days ago. So that was November 20th. Again, that was the final day of Scorpio. It was either November 20th or 21st. I think it was, actually it was the 21st, I think. That was the final day of Scorpio. So eventually, they will bring Belarus into the conflict. So this will all ultimately lead to the contrivance of a narrative that will justify the artificial collapse of the West. It is a trap, yes, and Biden signing off on long-range ATACMS being utilised to strike deep into Russian territory is to further construct the narrative of the innocence of Trump, which again will permit a strategic extension of this psychological vent that is encapsulated by the figure of Trump. Under Trump's administration, I suspect that we will see the bringing about of a world war. It is inevitable given the geopolitical manoeuvring and foreign policy trajectory of the collective West. This ultimately leads to the contrivance of a narrative that will justify the artificial collapse of the West and the migration of the basis of power, of financial and military power, to the East. It also provides a clear and inarguable pretext for the establishment of a worldwide system of government, which will probably be based around 2 superblocks, run in a neo-feudalistic and managerialist style that will ensure something like what we are about to witness will never occur again. That will ensure, or this will be the justification for this world government's existence, to ensure something like what we are about to witness will never occur again. The false light of the Saviour snare, the Antichrist or Al-Masih al-Dajjal. As the old adage goes, the more things change, the more they stay the same. Is a nuclear winter approaching? Well, the world sure is becoming an even more cold and unforgiving place, devoid of sense and lashed to the mast of senseless fantasy and maladapted delusions of grandeur and worldwide utopia.